Hi y'all, welcome back. In this video I'm going to talk about building out a controllers and their views, and I'm going to start with the recipe model and create the corresponding controllers and views for it in this video. I wanted to point out one thing from the last video is that the .NET EF migrations add InitialCreate. That code brings in, when you run it, it brings in a migration folder into your project, so just be aware of that. Another thing I wanted to show you is that this is what the template looks like with the .NET new MVC shortcut. So your MVC is going to come with styling that looks like this. It's going to have a nav bar, it's going to say this, that, and the other thing. It's going to have a little privacy note. So with regards to that, in your home controller, I guess I already deleted it, but let's see, I could bring it back. This one right here, your privacy route, we just got rid of that because we didn't feel like we needed it. Other than that, keep your response cache. That will be good. And in your home controller, I guess some differences that I saw was that here, instead of public action result, it's I action result. I don't know what that is, but I accept it as it is, and it seems just fine. One thing we do want to add to the index view is what we have in our other projects, HTTP get parentheses, quotes, and slash. And that will be for our index page. And over to the corresponding view, this is what it looks like, which connects to the welcome, and then they have our link to the docs, but we don't want that. And can I redo? Can I Control Z? Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to say welcome to the recipe book homepage and select a link from the navigation bar to get started. And so in their shared folders over here, they have the underscore layout.cs HTML where they have their nav bar, and they have their well, I guess I changed that already, or no, recipes, right, because that's our project name. So recipes, home, privacy. Anyways, I'm going to change this, which I already did, so I'm just fast forwarding here. So I have a home button, categories button, recipe button, ingredients button, and a search by button. And the other things that I changed on the nav bar for each of those. So for the home, I made sure that the ASP-controller was set to home. That's referring to the controller. So for our home page, we want to go to the home controller, and the ASP action wants to be index because that's our index page. So that's the same for the rest of these. For our categories link, we want to go to the categories controller and the index as our action. For the recipes, we want to go to the recipes controller and go to the index action. That's the same for ingredients, and search by, we also want to go to the index page. So yeah, that's that. We changed that with the controller, so we should be able to see that because we're now listening. Come on, internet. There we go. Homebook page, set the link. Here we have our home, categories, recipe, ingredients, search by. And in this video, as I already said, we're going to do recipes. So we will start there. First off, I'm going to start by creating a recipes controller. And I'm just going to copy everything from the home controller, all the using statements, the namespace. I'm going to just change the class to recipes controller and get rid of this thing because we only need it in that first one. And the first thing we're going to do is call the index. And in our index, what we want in that page is to show us a list of all of our recipes. So down here I'm going to create the recipes folder and the index. HTML. The index view. So yes, as I was saying, we want to see all of our recipes. So in our index view, we want to pass in a list of all recipes. So to grab our recipes from the database, this is how we do it. We say var, any variable name, we're going to use db because it seems to be standard, and we're going to say new recipe context. And what this is referring to is the recipe context that we described in our model.cs. And the recipe context is our database context. This is what connects us to our database. So when we call it, we're creating a new connection as far as I understand. So we're saying new connection, and we're going to say database recipes, calling the table called recipes, and we're going to say to list. And this built-in method just grabs everything in the recipes table and puts it in a list for us. And here we'd want to store it in a variable called recipes list, and then pass our recipes list into the view. But we can, recipes. But there's a shorthand for that, and that would be to skip out on creating a variable and simply pass that little line of code straight into the view. And so this should grab all of our recipes in the database, all of our recipe objects in the database, and present them into our index. Currently, we don't have anything in our database. So, before we do that, let us, actually I guess we can put in some code in our index. In this, I'm just going to grab from my GitHub, where are reviews, recipes. And this is the same code that we've been doing for our indexes. We pass in a list, and we say if the list, our model .count is 0, just tell us that there are no recipes. Otherwise, display each recipe in our list of recipes. So that's what we have going on here. We have some extra things that I did later, which I did a function to order the recipes, but we'll just come back to that later. So cool, and then here we have a button to add a food recipe. So, with this great index, we are set up, but we don't have any recipes in our database, so let us create a controller that allows us to save recipes. Here we're going to do the same thing, http TP get, and we're going to say recipes. This should also be recipes /new, and public I action result, and this will be called new. And here we are just going to say return view. Nothing complicated right now. And over in our recipes, we're going to have the corresponding view called new. Again, it's Same, similar, you know. And here I'm just copying from my GitHub. In this form we have extra stuff. This is has stuff where we already connected it to the category, but I'm just going to get rid of that for now. Okay. So our form is going to grab the things relevant to the properties in our recipe model, which for us is a name and instructions. So here we have our form, we have recipe name, recipe instructions, very good. It's going to post to /recipes. This looks great. Yay! So here, now we want to create a corresponding post method, and we're going to post to recipes, nothing new here. And this is going to be called create a la CRUD. And here, this is where things get interesting. First, we're going to pass in our two names from the form. So the first one was recipe name. The second one was a string called recipe instructions. Great. And just like we did in our index, we're going to say new recipe context. That's how we get in connection with our database. So var database equals new recipe context. And then we say var recipe, creating a new variable recipe, and we're saying new recipe object, and in curly brackets we're saying name equals to recipe name, the variable we passed in, and instructions equal to recipe instructions, the variable we passed in. So this is saying that I'm pretty sure at least, the columns of name and instructions, which are also the properties of recipe, the columns in the recipes table are going to be equal to recipe name and recipe instructions. So then we say db recipes, talking about our database, the table name, and then we're saying add, calling the built-in method of add, and we say add our new object called recipe. And then to save the item in the database, we say db save changes, another built-in method, which is really sweet. And then we say return redirect to action and take us back to the index. And that is all it takes to create a new object in our database, which is pretty easy, again. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to show off an individual instance of a recipe. And in the show, we're also going to be able to see the instruction property listed out in detail. So this is going to be a get, and we're going to call this recipes slash, in curly brackets, we are going to call this just ID. Public action results. And this is, of course, going to be called show, and we're going to be grabbing the ID from the URL. And to, this, of course, is going to be linked to each of the recipes based on our index, how we list our recipes in our for each. Each of them is a link that takes it to recipes slash the ID connected to that specific recipe. And so in our controller, that same link is going to be what we have in the URL. Nothing new there. So to grab that specific recipe from the database, we again open up our connection. We say var db equals new recipe context, and then we say var found recipe equals db.recipes database dot our table name recipes, and then use our built-in method find, and we're going to pass in our ID. And then we are going to say return view, and we're going to pass in found recipe. But again, you can shorten this code up just by passing the code I have highlighted, essentially skipping the variable and just passing in the code to access the database and find the object straight into the view. So that's what we're doing here. And so now let's create our corresponding view in recipes. And let's grab it from the GitHub. So in all this code that I just pasted, it has a lot more options that include connecting it to our category class. And so I'm just going to get rid of that for now, and try to find just that. Wow. That's all it is. Yep. Bye. Okay, all we're going to have here is, since we're passing in the single recipe, we're going to say model.name, sweet, model.instructions, sweet, it's going to look great, and then we have links to different pages. We can add a new recipe from here, edit a recipe, and then also delete this recipe. Next, we're going to work on edit and delete. For edit, we'll just start with edit. This is going to take us to a page that has a form. So let's start there. We're going to say new file, edit.cs HTML. And here in this file, what are we going to have? Let's go see. The edit file is the same form as the new file. It just has different, or no, it doesn't, does it? Instructions. I'm just going to get rid of that. So the one thing that I figured out that I really liked was that in our edit, we added values here in the input areas, so that the current value of the property of the recipe object that we're passing in is displayed automatically, so you know what you had before, which I think is kind of nice. But anyways, other than that, here we just have a form, and so we're referencing the object in our model, so that means in our route that we create, we need to pass in that same model. So back in recipes, we're going to create another HTTP get. Oops. And it's going to look like this. HTTP. You know what? I'm going to be lazy for this. Let's copy this. It's going to be called edit. it's a get method. This is going to be at recipes ID curly brackets / edit. And into this route we are going to pass in the ID that we're getting from the URL. And same thing as we've been doing, we say var db equals new recipe context, and here we are going to run the find method. Var recipe equals db our recipe context dot recipes, the name of our table that we're accessing, find the built-in method, and we're passing in the ID. And then into our view we can pass in recipe. I'll just leave this as it is. The shorthand is in the show right above. It's pretty much the same. Very same. So with that done, we are going to want to do a post method that actually updates our database. So we will run our post to /recipes/ID, and this will be public iaction result update, and here we're going to pass in the ID that we're getting from the URL, the recipe name that we're getting from the form, the recipe instructions that we're also getting from the form, and then later on when we associate categories with it, we'll also be passing in the category ID. Okay, so we create a new recipe context. We're calling this DB. And let's see. We're going to first locate our recipe. db.tablename recipes.find, passing in our ID. And then with this so I created two if statements. But I don't even know if I need them anymore. Anyways, I'll write it as I have. It's just saying that if the input is not null, then edit the database. But since we're already passing a value into the form, it's never not going to be null. Yeah, if that makes sense. So to change the database, we say recipe.name equals recipe name, and then recipe instructions is not equal null. Recipe.instructions equals recipe instructions. And at the bottom we say db.savechanges, and we're going to say return redirect to action, and we're going to go back to show, and we are going to also pass along our ID. New ID equals ID. The ID to the right of the equal sign refers to the ID that we've been passing in through from the URL, the recipe object ID number. And so what's going on here is it's just saying our found recipe object, we're just calling the property name and setting it to the variable that we pass in, and then we're calling the instruction property of our recipe object, our found recipe object, and we're just setting it equal to something else, and then we're saving changes. And that's how you update the database. So now we will move on to our last item of interest, which is to delete a category. Already in our show, we have our button to delete, which is nested in a form. And it has the action /recipes, recipe ID, and /delete. So we'll just follow along with that same URL when we create this. So let me find what I'm facing. HTTP post recipes /ID /delete public I action result, and I actually called this delete recipe, and we're passing in the ID that we're getting from the URL. And here, as we've done before, we're opening up our database connection called recipe context. And then we're finding our specific recipe object. db.recipes, again, it's the table name, find based on our ID, and then we say database dot recipes, our table, calling the method remove, and we're passing in our recipe object that we just found. And then we say database db save changes, and then we're done. We'll return redirect to action and take us back to index, since our recipe doesn't exist anymore and we don't have a show page for it. And so that's how you have all of CRUD functionality using the link methods. I'm pretty sure all of these, like the add, remove, save changes, find, I'm pretty sure those are all link methods. Not super duper sure, but pretty sure. And yeah, so that's a good start for you all. Next, I will do the categories controller, and then I'll link the two up using the select forms, where you can just add a bunch of categories to each recipe, and then in categories you can add a bunch of recipes to categories. So eventually we'll get there.